get started. Talk about the minutes from our last meeting. Any changes or corrections needed? If none, would someone make a motion to accept?
I'll make a motion.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Very good. To the budget report, which is attached, pretty simple one this month. Investment earnings, and then the other operating, non-operating revenues is the money we transferred from our reserve fund to cover the expenses down below, which are salaries, insurances, taxes, and $600 towards our monthly payment towards our ID website. That would be it. We don't have a report this month on our T-bills because for whatever reasons this month, we didn't receive the monthly statement from NBT Bank. Carol contacted them yesterday. And as of 4 o'clock, it wasn't posted on their website, so unfortunately we don't have and that she communicated that to you.
Took all my thunder.
Any questions on the budget report? If none, will someone make a motion to accept? Dave?
I'll second.
Sue? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Committee reports, audit committee? Todd, anything to offer?
The monthly bank reconciliation, yes, Carol sent them to me, I reviewed them and all was in order. And there was no T-bill information this month.
Very good. Other reports, CRG, Kent. You're on.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Mark.
So I'll just go through this really quickly. If there's any questions, we can talk about it. So the first section on the micro enterprise grants and the micro enterprise CARES Act grant program. I think you guys have heard about these programs before. I would just say the micro enterprise CARES Act money is pretty much coming to an end. We've got a meeting this week to allocate our final funds. So that comes to an end. But I think the good news is over the last 2 years with that money, the two programs combined, there's been over 2 million in grant awards to the local businesses. So that's been really good. We'll miss that program. The EPA assessment program, we're just waiting on some approvals from the EPA. I think you guys probably can appreciate more than most that it's a slow process. And so we're working through that. We did have a meeting with the Broad Alvin town officials about a zombie property that we're trying to get to a third party to get it back productive again. And we're waiting on the EPA for some grant money for redevelopment plans for phase 2 to get properties in phase 2 properties from the phase 1 operation. Number 3, I haven't heard much about this, but I guess there was an RFP project, Project Stringfellow. It sounds like somebody from the IDA was involved in that. But I don't have a lot of information on it, but it's a possibility for one of our industrial parks. Item 4, CRT is part of this New York Loves Nanotech team. And recently went to an event. We were pretty surprised and concerned when we saw the map that was provided in your handouts. Because there's just a huge gap between A and B, Fulton and Utica, which is us, pretty much. Big part of it. So we're working like FMCC is even on there with the academics. So it's just to us a real startling gap there that we need to get addressed. So we're working to get that changed. But it's an interesting map. I hadn't seen it until I saw this report, and yeah, it's kind of concerning that there's nothing in there for our area. So we'll be working to address that. Item 5, I've got a request in the HUD for funds for a grant that we approved for CRT. So that'll be in process. I know it'll take a while, but it's for the Johnstown Commerce Park 30-day. Big news for us was item 6. We closed on the 34 West Fulton Street property a couple weeks ago. So we are now tenants of that property instead of owners. We'll probably be there at least the next 3 months and potentially another year. We'll see what happens. So the good news is the new owners are flexible about it. Well, Loan Fund approved a loan to a startup, Mount Mama's Cantina and Eatery on South Main. So that's good news for them. Skipping down to 9, just to acknowledge it again, probably you've heard this before, but the downtown development specialist is really busy right now assisting the project owners on that BRI grant. Mostly with their interim financing needs, if you have to finance those projects and every person. I think in your handout, there's also a copy of an ad that went out to was in the Trade and Industry Development magazine. For Fulton County. A number of the parks, commerce parks and technology parks are listed in the app, so we can get some action out of that. And then finally, number 11, there's an annual meeting for the Center of Economic Growth. In your attachments, Ron and I are planning to go to that. Ron's been to it every year. He really highly recommends it. We encourage all of you to consider going to it. Unless anyone ever been to it in this group. Okay. Something to think about. So that's it. Sorry. Any questions or discussion?
Any questions for Ken?
So I've been to Mountain Mama's Cantina and the ribs are delicious.
That's good.
Very good. Thanks, Ken.
Thank you.
Got your umbrella?
You do. Thank you, Scott.
All right, moving on to old business, Nexus Renewables, not much to report there. Still waiting for that interconnect approval from National Grid. With respect to Winstanley, discussions with National Grid about getting more power out of Tryon. National Grid is currently working on a project to bring approximately 7 to 8 megawatts of distribution level power to Tryon. That should be completed soon, if I'm correct, late 2024 or early 2025.
Right.
The target time for that. And so that's what Winstanley is going to be looking to utilize for potential projects out of Tryon.
Just a quick question.
Yes, sir.
Does Adam have a sense? I know we've talked about this, it's been a few months though, that this has been sort of a hot button. But do you have a sense that the addition of that electrical capacity will help incentivize acquisition of new tenants at Tryon?
Oh, yes, because obviously the lack of power,
Right.
prohibits us from doing anything today. Okay, but given how long it typically takes, to get a project to completion, the fact that this is going to be ready at the end of next year fits perfectly in with Winstanley's ability to market right now.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
And we talked at the Vireo project, they didn't have enough power to take cogeneration.
Right.
While there's enough natural gas capacity, if a developer wanted to supplement that power, there's the ability to do so.
Gotcha. Okay.
And I've had that discussion with Adam Winstanley. He has directed his construction people to look at and cost out what it would be to add 1, 2, 3, 4 megawatts of power in the event they got a company that was interested in coming to Tryon, but the 7 to 8 megawatts, wouldn't be enough. What would it cost to supplement that with on-site cogeneration?
Gotcha.
And my point to Adam was Vireo has done it successfully, right? And so something for consideration.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
Wow, are they up and running yet?
no, but not because of the cogen issue. Okay, so.
And it's 5 to 7 megawatts, I believe, is the capacity that would be there once the. line has been converted.
All right, backup generator project. One issue has come up with that, and it was discovered when they tested the generator. When the generator kicks on because of a power outage, when the generator shuts off, the sewer pumps don't automatically kick back on. All right, so that was discovered when they tested it, turned it on. They shut it off. Everybody's, goes away because the generator did what it was supposed to do perfect. And then a short time later, an alarm went off, went to 911, a high level alarm in the tank there. And so the facility staff went out, saw that the pumps weren't operating, and they had to manually turn them on. So the operation of pumps is separate from Cobalt's contract to put in the generator, but it's related. So we contacted General Control Systems, the company that supplied and installed those pumps a number of years ago under a completely separate contract. All right. And they said, well, what you're going to need to do is reprogram or change the programming in the pumps so that they will automatically turn back on when the generator shuts off. And so we got a price from them of about $4,800 to do the programming, and they also recommend adding a UPS, an uninterruptible power supply. And so what I'm suggesting is that even though that's separate from Cobalt's contract, we have a $5,000 contingency allowance built into Cobalt's contract, which we haven't touched. We went to Cobalt and said, can we run this expense through that contingency allowance? And he said, yes. So what I'm recommending for today is for to authorize charging that total cost through Cobalt's contingency allowance.
Yeah.
Everybody understand?
How much is the UPS?
I didn't get a breakdown. They didn't provide us a
So
breakdown.
the 48 is
It's all inclusive, okay, of everything. Okay.
Because it was a while ago, did an engineer design that for us? I forget how the process worked. I would think it would be, it's a logical thing that, generator.
But at the time, we didn't have a generator out there.
Right. Okay.
That was the issue.
There goes my
The time we-
conspiracy theory. Because that's a little, they
Okay.
were found before. That's,
And which is all why we pursued this project, because we had a couple of instances out there where power went out and the pumps, were off, and we had to call in Adirondack Septic to come and pump those tanks out, while those pumps were out of service. Okay, so asking for a motion to charge this expense to the Cobalt contingency allowance. So,
I'll do it.
okay, so any further questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Burial health, still no execution of the lease, but we'll talk a little bit further about that in executive session. Your tagline that we approved at your last meeting is shown at the bottom of your page now. We incentivize development opportunities. I think that's going to be plugged into our website here shortly. With our treasury bills, the last bill that we purchased a year ago is set to expire shortly, next week. And likewise, the fifth T-bill that you purchased back in February, if you recall, that one was purchased for a 6-month time period. So we've got the one that was purchased a year ago for 12 months, and the one we purchased 6 months ago for 6 months are both coming due. And so we need to do something with those two. So in your agenda are the current T-bill rates as of last Monday, or this past Monday when we got them, compared to current CD rates. And the 5-month CD rate is a little bit under any of the T-bill rates. Now, we also have an opportunity. Mike checked with NBT about putting the money back into our money market account. And that money market account is now paying 5.25%. Which is still a little bit under the 12-month T-bill rate. So up to you folks, what you want to do with these two T-bills. How you wish to renew. I think your two choices are going to be the 12-month, or it's your choice. What you wish to do with it.
I'm for the 12-month. I don't see anything on the horizon that we're gonna need the money, and as things takes a while to. When something does come up, that's just my opinion.
I'm for the 12.
This is only one portion of the total investment portfolio, so it's not like I'm tying all of it up. I'd be in favor of the 12-month T-bill.
I agree.
Is there a consensus would someone make a motion then to authorize the CFO to
Renew with 12-month T-bill.
That's a motion by Dave. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll make. the
Joe? Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Very good. The New York State Economic Development Council's Fall IDA Academy has been scheduled for November 9th. I know several board members went to their Spring Academy. Just wanted to give everybody an early alert. Registrations hasn't started yet, but from just a scheduling standpoint, if anyone is interested in attending, plug that in into your schedule for now. And when the registration period opens, I will ask for who wishes to attend, and we can get you registered for that event.
Where is Lion Falls?
Between
Boonville and Loudon.
Yeah,
Nowhere. Interesting choice of venue.
yes.
Leave Jim back in next to the lights.
Oh, is that right?
It's really a neat facility that they, it was an old building that they renovated into an event center.
Oh, really?
So they're kind of using this as a showcase.
Gotcha.
So. New York State Economic Development Council also hired Camoin Associates to conduct an economic impact of IDAs across New York State. The last two pages of your agenda. And I wanted just to mention that on the very last page, the upper left green blocks up there where it says that IDAs have been involved with 411 projects that have had a residential component since 2018. Again, just reemphasizing the fact that housing is a project that IDAs are involved with, right? And but also look that there's 322 wind solar energy projects have been approved. And down below, the lower left, 459 approved projects in downtown corridors. Another point of emphasis of other IDAs. Obviously, those would be targeted more in larger urban areas.
The other interesting statistic is for every dollar of taxes abated,
Right.
IDAs generate $6.57 in tax revenue.
Yes. So you provided, that's the incentive is, and providing the incentive, but getting the return on that. So. All right, on to other business. Under continuing our board training, we'll be talking about our uniform tax exemption policy. Over the last couple of meetings, we've agreed to amend our UTEP to add certain types of project descriptions. Down at the bottom, you've also agreed to put into the UTEP language about what you would have to do in order to incentivize a housing project. And there will be two criteria that have to be met: promote employment opportunities in the county and prevent economic deterioration in the county. Then we also talked at your last meeting about certain types of projects, brownfields, adaptive reuse, and tourist destinations as potentially having a different pilot relative compared to the standard one that we have, which is now based on 485B, which is a 50% exemption in year one, and it drops 5% a year. And so what I've looked at, and when we're out to a number of other county IDAs to see how we would compare, and proposing or offering here a couple of options. Look at the brownfield and adaptive reuse projects compared to tourist destinations, and conceptually saying that those types of projects we might need to incentivize a little bit more than tourist destination projects. So we would look to, incentivize a brownfield project where we're gonna have to tear down an old leather mill and build a new building on it. The cost of doing that is probably gonna be greater than building a hotel on a clean site. Want to incentivize both, but incentivize the brownfield and the adaptive reuse projects a little bit more. So
Is there a gray area there where the hotel could be going up on a brownfield?
well, then you would have to interpret it. Is it a brownfield project? You could interpret it as a brownfield project or a tourist destination project. And if you wanted to further incentivize, you could call it a brownfield project. Okay. So one option for the brownfield and adaptive reuse projects would be to, and again, this is kind of very similar to what we're seeing in other counties. And if we're going to be competing against these other counties, years 1 through 6, 100% exemption, and that exemption drops 20% a year, so that over the 10-year period. And with all these, I try to keep the
I was trying to silence it.
sign from above.
Good morning. Final Jeopardy.
And with all of these, I've tried to keep them a 10-year pilot to be consistent with what our current pilot is for. The other option would be 7 years of 100% exemptions, and then it drops 25% a year. Throw both of those out for discussion. Any reactions to that? And obviously, be willing. We could do anything. You can do anything you wish, but
So I think our more of a comment than a question. Backing up the brownfield development that Sue and I went to, there's a lot of discussion of funding stack for these types of projects because there's a lot of grant money, Restore New York money, and then the developer obviously puts in their equity. And the IDA tax abatement was part of those equity stacks in the projects they demonstrated it worked. So it's kind of multiple funding sources to assist developers in these projects, and then getting, I will call blighted properties and municipalities back on the tax roll and hopefully improve structure of what they're practicing.
So I know we're talking about the brownfield and adaptive reuse projects. But on the list provided in letter D, is there a reason you didn't include residential projects as a project type that might be incentivized differently than the 485B model?
Because at our last meeting, I didn't hear that, housing projects calling for us a separate pilot. That wasn't part of the discussion. If you wish it to be, I could certainly do that.
So that would mean that the residential projects would go under
The 485E
current pilot
Right.
structure.
Yeah, that would,
Which won't work for residential because they need to mortgage these things for 30 years. And our pilot structure doesn't align with that. So there's a mismatch with that.
So we would want our pilot to be 30 years.
Well, I think correct me if I'm wrong, I what we're doing when we went to the academy in the spring. So basically, if we want to get in the business of incentivizing residential developments, which are multifamily apartment developments, basically, we would need to find a way to structure our pilot to match their funding timeline, which is typically a 30-year timeframe. So a 10-year pilot just isn't going to sync up with that. So therefore, you wouldn't get anybody really looking to come here. I don't remember the discussion. I thought we were angling in that direction.
If I misunderstood, then let's
I could easily
get it corrected right now. What do you wish to do with respect to the housing?
And bankers thing on the other side of that equation. We take into account with the pilot, but we don't look for them to match the funding.
Well,
So if you have a 30-year mortgage, the bank isn't looking at the pilot matches. Because your pilot's gonna step up anyways. So if it's 10 years or 30 years, we're gonna calculate that into the debt service.
I get that. I think it's the developers who are looking to have it aligned. Obviously, the leverage they're trying to get is, hey, we want to put this multifamily housing in your community to provide good, clean housing. And help us incentivize this, give us a pilot for 30 years kind of thing. I think it's something that should be on the table. But I also know, for me, the debate has been whether or not we want to even be in the game of assisting residential projects. Is that what you're referring to as not being settled discussion?
No, I thought the group wanted to incentivize housing.
Okay,
And that's why we had those established,
Yeah.
the two criteria for, that the board would have to, make a finding on. And those two criteria were based upon the court cases and the contractor's opinion from a number of years ago.
right,
So we conceptually, yes, I thought the board wanted to incentivize,
okay.
but if I misunderstood, that's fine. Let's get it changed. So let's put it out there. Do you wish to do you wish to add housing to one of these two groups here? Or do you want housing to be a separate pilot that extends out longer than 10 years?
Well, I think it should be a third category of pilot.
Okay.
And
I like the third category. Personally, I think 30 years is a bit lengthy. To me, I think 15 seems a little bit more reasonable. That gets them in. A lot of people don't even ride out their mortgages fully to the 30 years. They're refinancing, they're selling, whatever. I think 30 seems just a bit too long for me.
So what we heard at the academy was that the reason that 30 years is what they're looking for is because a lot of the other funding that they're getting, non-bank funding, the grant funding, and requires them to have, lower than market rate apartments. And in order for them to make their financials work, they need that IDA incentive to fill in the gap. That's what we heard. I mean,
we didn't see any actual, funding stack examples or anything like that. There was a developer that came in and talked about the work that they've been doing with residential. And it was clear that the IDA that was involved made an effort to align the duration of the pilot with the duration of the bond issue.
I think it's a mortgage.
Yeah, some sort of mortgage vehicle that was 30 years.
What if we have a separate category for housing? But instead of a specific 30-year pilot, we put in there that pilots for housing projects can be up to 30 years. And so if by chance a company is doing a 15-year mortgage, financing it for 15 years, you can do it for that.
I'd be happy with a very generic kind of statement that just says, residential project pilots will be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, depending on the financing structure of the project and, the balance of IDA commitments.
Jim, you have to refresh my memory, but did we not change from a 15 or 20? Didn't we used to follow the financing in the park? And we ended up moving our pilot back to 10 years, and there were reasons we did that?
No. We used to follow 485E, which was that opportunity zone. And the pilots back then were 7 years of 0%, 100% exemptions. And that exemption went down 25% a year, so that in year 11 you were paying full taxes. It's always been just a 10 years, but it was a much stronger incentive when we had the opportunity zone.
No,
Then the state canceled the opportunity zone program. And your predecessors here said, we no longer want to provide that. We're going to go back to just providing 485B. But we've never had a pilot here more than 10 years.
I thought we had pilots for 20 years that the incentives ended after 10, but the previous councils made it a 20-year.
We had 20-year leases,
Okay.
correct.
Yeah.
But the pilot
We're
was
matched up with the lease.
matched up with the lease. Yes. Okay. I stand corrected in that regard, but it was after year 10, you're paying 100% anyway, so there was no benefit.
Correct.
Okay, being provided. So the benefits were only for 10 years. The pilot may have extended another 10 years.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
but there was no benefits during that second 10 years.
There was some shifty reason for that. I forget.
Tied to financing.
Yes.
That's what they were all tied to the
Yes.
the financing for the project, because that's what the EDC was doing at that time. So if we wish to do housing, we can say that residential projects will be evaluated on a case-by-case basis relative to a pilot. But I would suggest that we put in there that pilots could be granted up to 30 years, up to.
Sure.
So that there's clarity that they're willing to go past the tech.
For me, the significance is that we're communicating to prospective developers that we are amenable to a residential project. We've got an understanding that we won't go more than 30 years. But, let's talk about it, submit your application, let's figure out what works for the project and for the community, not, just a broad brush.
What would the structure of the 30-year be? Like the first 10 years would be, 100%, and how would that?
I think that's the part to be negotiated with the prospective applicant, is to see what makes the most sense. They're gonna obviously want to come in and say, well, give us the first 15 years at 100%. And then we'll set, or zero, whatever, and we'll say, well, no, how about 7 years or something to that effect.
I think you'll find that the developers will come with a proposed schedule. It's an actual payment. So they know what the existing tax, or estimate what the existing tax would be on a completed project. And then they like to lock into a flat rate. So they know going forward, to your point about the affordable units, and they have to have a certain rent structure. And so then they know every year this is a budgeted item, and they know exactly what that tax is going to be. So it's not necessarily an exemption calculation, it's an actual figure, whether it's $5,000 a year, whatever that number is, it's an actual figure that they're locked in to pay going forward for that.
And with that, if we're gonna negotiate tax payments for the 3 taxing jurisdictions that would be involved in the project, would those taxing jurisdictions have to consent to the amounts in that schedule? Or do we have, as the IDA board, have the authority to approve that schedule without the approval of the taxing jurisdiction?
Well, that goes back to the point that Gentleman Escobar says that the UTEP must be approved with I forget the exact, what is it, with the input, but not approval of the taxing jurisdictions. And so it's it's unclear whether an amendment such as these types of amendments need to go back out to the taxing jurisdictions and get that sign off or comment, or at least give them the opportunity to comment on the proposed changes. So in my opinion, if you did if you let the taxing jurisdictions have an opportunity to comment on your proposed changes, then they've made it, they either make it clear that they don't care, or they don't have any modifications, or they're okay with what your proposal is. If they don't, then we still need to notice that. I mean, I would recommend that you get their, maybe not formal approval, but make sure they're okay with it going forward, but there's no requirement that they approve it. There's no legal requirement that they approve. So you know, I'm not sure if you want to go back out now, or if you would prefer to do it when the project comes up.
What I was anticipating doing is we've been talking now for several months about potential changes to our utility. And once we had them all kind of settled, what I was going to do is come back to you with all of those included and shown as red line changes to the UTEP. All right. And so at that time, because I had asked Kara, we talked about this previously. Do we have to send these proposed changes out to the taxing jurisdiction so that they see what proposed changes were being made? And as Kara just articulated, we're not, the law doesn't require it, but she's suggesting that we do so. The taxing jurisdictions do not have the authority to veto or override your ability to make these changes, but you would be giving them the opportunity to comment on it. Okay, so if we get through all this today, then what I would do is come back at your September meeting with that uniform tax exemption policy with all of these red line changes made to it, and ask you folks to authorize sending this out to all of the taxing jurisdictions, give them time to review and comment on it, and then come back following me or whenever those comments are done and review them. If there's a bunch of comments, decide whether you want to act on those. If there's no comments, go ahead and make changes. Okay,
Makes
that's
sense.
kind of what I was going to be suggesting.
Sounds
I
fair.
mean, if they're venomously opposed or whatever, then we may want to play nice and make some
Correct.
changes, but
Or you could say, appreciate the input, but we still think this is the right thing to do. That you have that ability to do that.
that works.
Okay. Okay, so we've settled on housing. Let's go back to Brown. Oh,
So hypothetically, if a developer came with their project listing IDA, our current policy would not allow us to be flexible enough to match up with a 30-year
Your
policy.
current policy would require you to go under the,
deviation.
the deviation policy. And then there's quite a bit of criteria that the project needs to meet to qualify for a deviation. So I think that's where this discussion started, about making the modifications so that the criteria set forth in the deviation policy didn't need to be met. You would always say, yes, we're going to do these types of projects. We're not going to require you to fall under the deviation and meet all those criteria. I just had one comment about the definitions. And if, for instance, the project comes with market rate and affordable housing mixed, is that going to be all? Is the intention that the entire project come under the pilot, or just the portion of the project that's affordable housing? Because I think that's going to be, that's currently some of the trend that we're seeing, is that it's like a mixed project with market rate apartments and affordable housing apartments mixed in the same complex.
That was what, again, we talked about market rate affordable, and there was commentary about, well, we not necessarily need to incentivize market rate housing, but affordable housing. Again, if we want to incentivize both, then we need to add a definition of what market rate housing is, and decide whether you want to incentivize market rate housing also.
You also kind of cover it under number 3, where you're talking about qualified projects down in your non-industrial, you reference housing.
Correct. Qualified, yes, but
Yeah, it's not defined, but
You could make an argument.
exactly, you've defined senior housing, you've defined affordable housing. You've got other housing under qualified. You know,
our intent here is to try to take the guesswork out. Okay. Okay, that's why we're trying to establish so what market rate, is that something you wish to have the ability to incentivize? Because again, you're gonna have the ability, it doesn't automatically say it, because what we're gonna put in here is housing projects will be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, and pilots will be granted up to 30
Well,
years.
I tend to think that maybe we should, simply because the idea of market rate in this area is different than market rate in Albany or Saratoga.
Correct.
And our market rate may need a little bit of help. But I think we could separate that and provide maybe two different pilot structures depending on the structure of the development. If that makes.
And I think by adding this kind of general language about pilots for housing projects, you're gonna have that ability to, look and do different things for different, if it's a mixed use type project like this, that with the affordable and market rate, you might be able to say, well, we'll give the market rate 15 years at this and the affordable 30 years at this.
Mhm.
All right.
So under senior housing, where did the 90% come from?
That's kind of the definition of where I saw in other IDA pilots.
Okay,
That's basically I just followed was what I've seen in other.
So basically it has to rent to the vast majority of people need to be 60 years of age or older
Correct. To be defined as
to
senior
be
housing.
defined as senior housing.
So I will add a definition for market rate. Okay, and I'll use what I'm typically seeing in other new types. Okay,
For the brownfield stuff, I would go with the first option.
okay,
That's my suggestion. And then for the tourist destination, again, the first option.
I'm good with both of that.
I think
For
it's
even at Brownfield, I don't think you necessarily have to give a tourist destination 100% off. Right off the bat.
fair. Fair.
That's gonna be a commercial development where they're expecting to make money.
Yeah, true.
Oh, and the opposite, the brownfields, I'd like to see, you're having somebody take a huge chance or take over an abandoned building. I'd like to give them even more of the setup, like.
Wow. So you're thinking the second option for brownfields?
Yeah. Even,
I'm
might even
agnostic
be,
either way. I could.
brownfield, I might even be in favor of being 100% exempt for 10 years. That's.
Wow.
I know.
Who are you? Yeah, I mean, to your point, Joe, I think that's a fair assessment in that you want those properties to no longer be zombie properties. You want them to be put to good productive use. So a maximum incentive could be worthwhile. I'm not sure I'm there with you in terms of 100% for 10 years. But I could certainly get behind the second option there.
so do you view brownfields and adaptive reuse the same?
Well, brownfields
Do you
is,
think brownfields need to be incentivized a
Yeah.
little bit more?
correct.
Well, and having said that, do you want to separate those? And for brownfields, just brownfields, you have 100% for 8 years. 9 years is 50%, 9 years, and then go to year 10 is 0. Just for brownfields,
Yeah.
and then the adaptive reuse, you use one of the two that are here.
So brownfield is something that has contamination
Correct.
Yeah.
and adaptive reuse is just, but do we have well, yeah, I guess we would.
And just as an FYI, adaptive reuse could still have contamination in it, things like asbestos that we need to be taken out, other chemical things that are not in the ground. Right,
Or would that qualify as a brownfield or would that be adaptive reuse?
With, well, for a brownfield, it has to be out, it has to be a site listed on New York State DEC's environmental site remediation database.
Okay.
Just because it has asbestos in it, doesn't
Fine.
qualify it as a brownfield. Brownfield is a fairly well contaminated structure that's made it onto DEC's database.
right.
Okay,
So do we want to separate them? I mean, in adaptive reuse. I like the idea of incentivizing that because we do have. Buildings that are sitting vacant that could be turned into something else, but they may have asbestos inside or other issues. I mean.
Mhm.
I like incentivizing those.
I do too. That's why I didn't object to lumping them together. But if we were to separate them, we could have two different pilot structures, one to represent a better or higher level of exemption and benefit for the brownfield and maybe a step down for the adaptive reuse project. So maybe the top one becomes the adaptive reuse structure and the brownfield goes to the bottom choice. As an option. And Mike, what would you want to see in the tourist
I like option two.
option two?
I liked option one because it's not all gonna be a Holiday Inn. There's gonna be mom and pop tourist destination startups too. And they may need that to make it off the ground. I like one.
Kind of support of giving a for-profit entity 100% right off the bat. $75% off your taxes for the first 7 years. Is pretty generous for someone in the business to make money.
We have a lot of recreational space in this county, though. I think we should incentivize tourist things.
You could change the number of years.
Like the first 2 years at 100% and then. I don't know as much about the tourist industry and what's out there.
My thought is like,
I like
if you got
that
somebody who
flexibility.
starts with the area,
Yeah.
say
Yeah,
Johnstown,
yeah.
but then somebody starts one in Northville, we're gonna call it Northville a tourist destination.
So that's probably not gonna qualify.
Right.
So just to the definitions,
Right.
that we need to modify that because that is actually a defined term in government law. Who the tourists are, and it's outside your, I forget the name, the economic development region, which is the DRI classification. And what we became known as the COVID designation, so whatever those counties are, so the tourist destination is people coming from outside of that economic region. So, so a diner probably is not gonna make, yeah.
It's like the campgrounds that we looked at earlier where we asked them where you
where
coming
people are
from.
coming from,
Yeah.
and they documented that there was gonna be a large
Yeah.
influx coming from outside of our region, correct? That's exactly correct.
So should we indicate that there needs to be some? Well, to Kara's point, aligning that definition with what the state has laid out. But is there a certain percentage of outside resident attendance at a tourist destination that makes, like in the same way that you included 90% of units are rented to and occupied by persons 60 years of age and older for senior housing?
Just as a
No, it
significant.
says, yeah, significant number.
Really?
And that leaves the interpretation of that up
To
to
this
this
board?
Yep.
Interesting.
Yep.
Okay.
I'll also agree with Todd, is I like a little vagueness that, if you, if someone sees a 30-year pilot, they're gonna want the 30-year pilot. They're not gonna ask for a 20-year, they're gonna ask for the maximum all the time. So.
And to the discussion, each project is different, and that's why I don't like locking in all the time.
Right.
You know, that you have to follow this criteria, and that's why I asked the question about. Would our current UTEP allow us to do certain things? And yes, we have a lot of flexibility, but it puts it back on the applicant. To demonstrate those reasons why we should move forward.
See, but the issue there, Todd, for me is that it's a significant disincentive for entities to come in and want to try to even figure out where our heads are at. And I think it makes it likely that if we don't make these changes, I don't think we'll ever see any significant increase in applications. I think what we heard at the academy in the spring was that developers like to be able to predict where their financial structure is headed, and these types of schedules help that. What I would suggest is that we could post this as our standard pilot. I mean, we can still have, you know, a deviation clause that if they came back and said, listen, we appreciate what you're offering here, but we still want more. Well, then that's where I think they have to go through a higher level of, you know, proof. Show us, demonstrate where that financial hardship is, give us a reason to go in that direction. My concern is that other IDAs are going in this direction, and we're kind of just holding at this 485B, you know, section, and I don't think we're competing very well with the other IDAs that are out there. That's my biggest concern with all of this.
You're absolutely correct. That deviation component will remain in UTEP. So even if we adopt all these new schedules, all right, these new pilots, you know, if somebody comes in for that brownfield project and we're offering 1 through 7 years of 100%. And they come in and say, listen, we're investing $100 million, you know, and we're going to create X number of new jobs, but it would be nice if we had 12 years of 100%. You know, you folks would then say, okay, let's look at it, look at the criteria and say, because you of this investment and job creation and this, that, whatever, we'll deviate on this particular pilot and extend it from 7 to 10 years, whatever that is. You'll still have that ability.
As long as we have that flexibility, I think that's key.
So for the tourist destination, some of these are gonna be seasonal. Meaning they're only gonna have a couple of months a year to make their money. So I think that also reinforces my pick for number 1. Because it's gonna take them a couple of years to get their tourist destination off the ground, especially if it's, say, just a summer thing where they've only got the summer months to make it work. It's gonna take them a couple of years to get their feet under them. I still like the first option.
So it sounds to me like you've got a picture in your head of what kind of business would benefit from this kind of incentive. Can you elaborate on that? You're saying seasonal business.
Well, you got like campgrounds, they're
Uh-huh.
typically seasonal. Maybe a kayak shop or something, they're gonna be seasonal.
What is it?
Oh,
Kayak
that's
shop,
not
the
tourist,
tourist-
and,
Right.
ski area, the Kroger Arts, they're really only hot and heavy in the summer. We have Royal Mountain, not that, you know, we already have them, I don't know if we get another one, but, I'm just thinking of what brings tourists to a community. You know, museums are usually non-for-profit, but, you know, a museum, again, probably something that's seasonal, you know, Blue Mountain Lake, they're seasonal. A tourist destination, I've done the zip lines in like Lake George and whatnot. I'm just thinking of things where, you know, I'm going and doing an activity, and a lot of them are seasonal.
The marinas qualify as tourist. They're pretty seasonal.
Yeah, I guess, I think my somewhat uninformed perspective on this is that the tourist destination piece is more directed towards hotels. But I don't know that, because I don't know how other IDAs might be.
Well, certainly, it would
Incentivizing.
include those.
Absolutely.
Okay, it would certainly include it, but it wouldn't prohibit marina.
Uh-huh.
If that marina owner has lined up, you know, he's got 100 bays and he submits, you know, documentation that says that 70 of those bays are going to be rented out to folks from outside the economic region,
Uh-huh.
right? it could therefore qualify as a tourist destination. Then it would be incumbent upon this group to say, do we want to incentivize that project?
And now if you're thinking hotel, what does a hotel look like to you? Like, to me, a hotel in, say, Kroger Lake could look more like a motel where it's just a few cabins. And to be totally honest, they have the ones that I've visited, mud season, the spring and the fall, they're kind of dead. So again, they are seasonal, you know, they get the most visitors in the summer, maybe leaf peeping, but then after that, it kind of dies off.
So in my head, the hotel projects that I would expect to pursue this type of incentive would likely be probably 50 to 100 rooms and be located in a portion of the county that is directly tied to infrastructure to handle it. And not be a smaller, mom and pop shop kind of thing where they've got 10 sort of separated rental cabins, that kind of thing. I'm not saying it can't happen that way. The discussion is really, you're championing small mom and pop shops to be able to take advantage of these incentives. Mike is suggesting that these really could be benefiting somewhat beyond our intention, a company that would presumably be expecting a profit year one based on the type of operation. Anybody else want to kick in here?
And I think if you're a small mom and pop, you better be anticipating making a profit year one too. I mean, why would you build those if it's not gonna make the profit? Why are you gonna make that a bet? Or I can make the same argument for all fields that have to produce. Okay,
Right.
You're not gonna be doing those projects to lose money. Right. Okay, so.
Right, and they're coming here for a reason.
100%, 7 years on those projects.
So for instance, in Warren County, in one period of time, a lot of hotels went in on, and at the same time in the town of Queensbury. And the IDA in that case worked out a deal, if you will, with Queensbury, and they only offered 485B structure for hotels. But another tourist destination would qualify for a different type of
Water park.
yeah, the water park. That would qualify for a different type of structure calculation. So they did take out the hotels that were, chain hotels, like the whatever, the Home 2, the Marriott came in. They all came in at the same time, and so it was a big hit on Queensbury. They wanted to make sure that it was all under one, so that's what they did in that case. So I mean, I like that.
And hence we create more categories. Every discussion we have, we create more categories, which gets back to my point
Yeah,
Right.
originally about having the flexibility, which we still will have, but we're just creating more categories as we discuss.
But it also,
More situations.
in a sense, protects the IDA from people coming in and, okay, we'll do this one this time, and then next similar project, you offer something else. It's like, well, why didn't I get what they got? Because
We don't have to create a separate category to follow this concept. Or we can say in the definition of the tourist destination project, we can say this excludes hotels. Okay, and therefore, our standard pilot is 485B. So if they wanted benefits, it would fall under 485B.
Yeah, as long as it's stated, we would consider hotels, because if they see it doesn't include hotels, well, I'm going somewhere else.
So, like another example, Joe, I know you brought this up in the past. Whoever did get someone who said, I own a mountain in Fulton County, I'm gonna start another ski center. I want 100% financing. We always talk about, what would Royal Mountain say? Who's been there for 50 years? You're gonna give them 100% right off the top, day one? I've been here 50 years. I've invested money in ski lifts, motocross. He's dug 2 new ponds up there.
but every business can say the same thing.
Right, so that's why I'm saying, why are we giving 100% right off the top for a new business? You're taking the same risk as the existing business is taking. I think option 2 is pretty significant discount I'm not in favor of giving a for-profit business 100% funding that may compete with an existing business. So,
But that's brownfields and adaptive reuse.
to me, brownfield is different. That property, if no one does anything with it, is gonna be vacant and not gonna generate any tax.
But that mountain that the guy owns may sit vacant too,
But he's paying tax,
maybe. Maybe. In
he's
theory,
just paying taxes on raw land.
I live in a community that is a touristy area, but like. There's no place for people to stay. There, and then, everybody gets pissed off over the Airbnbs because people have property that they're now, renting out on the weekends or whatever. I see Stratford, Bleecker, Coroga Lake, they need places for people to stay. There's fishing, there's hiking, there's the bike trails, but people can't stay. I'd like to see
me, that's more of
incentives.
an issue with the APA, not letting you put in water and something that would accommodate that amount of people.
Maybe, yes, I don't know
I
if
mean,
there's
I
any
grew-
studies.
I
but-
grew up in Northville, saying Northville's got a lot of people there in the summer, you probably double and triple the population in
Right.
the summer. No place for those people to stay.
We're building a new museum or whatever, or a tourist, what's where Scott, your thing in Northville. I mean, there's no place for people to stay. I'd like to see an incentive to encourage like a mom and pop to do something, a 10-room hotel or 10-room motel. Or, little rustic cabins or something.
And well, I'm just saying that I think that option 2 is enough of an incentive to do that. Okay,
Way to split the baby.
I've heard that going up the brownfield is adaptive reuse. For my second option would be for brownfields. The upper one would be for adaptive reuse. We're gonna have a separate one for housing. And then we're kind of stuck here on the tourist destinations. Now, so I guess we need to hear from others relative to what you think in terms of tourist destinations. Right? I see both points. And I think we need to understand that what you're showing here, if you do option 2, you're still incentivizing a tourist destination project. Number 1 incentivizes a little more, but let's understand that the second one is still going to be you're still going to be incentivizing a project. So let's hear what others think. of
And
those
if
two.
we were to apply our 45B model to any of these tourist destinations, 50% would be the greatest exemption right from the get-go. So I do agree with your assessment, Jim, that 75% years 1 through 7 is a significant exemption.
As do I, and I think that if there's a project that's compelling, they can always do a
The
deviation.
deviation, right?
I think we're here to incentivize development opportunities. So if a big company came in, they made more money, and that's what we're here to do. And I agree with what you're saying, Mike, in the new ski resort is a prime example. That well, that's what we're here to do, incentivize.
Where does that put you on the spectrum?
I like 2, or on
For tourist
for
destination.
tourists, yeah.
The 75.
That's fine.
2.
We know where Todd sits.
Maybe I'm getting softer in my old age here. What do you think?
Maybe.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, that puts us at a 3-3. Have 3 who like the first one, 3 who like the second.
Let's call up Joe.
Oh, yeah, you never did show.
Yeah.
Must have had a work thing. How about the tourism guy?
Well, I've been telling supervisors for the last 3 or 4 months now, We started to talk about housing and other things. I think we just need to make the biggest splash as possible to attract. You know, whether it's tourism related, commercial housing, we just need to be known that we want that type of development, I think, so.
So the first
Splash
option,
is
is like,
obviously the most, you know, is obviously, one. I think there's a lot of crossover, obviously, with commercial and what tourism would be, right? And obviously, hotels seem to be the greatest thing, but I mean, I look at an example of Northampton Marina, which is now Thompson's Marina, probably one of the largest marinas we have on our lake. A new couple purchased the marina 2-3 years ago. They put in probably $100,000 in new docks. They've added electrical components to those docks, pump out facilities. They built a few small little cabins on the facility, converted one. Used to be a small commercial building into a 2-unit residential rental. And when I was talking to the owner, I said, you know, where are most of your, you know, people coming in for the docks? And said, you know what, even people coming out of there, they can't afford to buy on a great second dock. So what they're doing is they're buying larger boats. And they're putting them on those slips, and they have electricals so they can run their ACs and their TVs. They have pump out facilities. They don't have to move their boats. And some of these people, they don't move their boat 2-3 miles in the whole summer. So it becomes their camp. And I would say, just looking at the back of the boat where they have the name of the boat and where it's from, I would say probably 70% of the boats out of the, there's got 150 slips there maybe, are from outside of our area. So I think, you know, that type of project, you can say it's commercial, but because of the draw of people coming into the area, it's also tourism. So
And they didn't apply for anything.
they probably didn't know what's available.
I'm also curious about the vote that you said it was 3-3, because I didn't see it that way. I saw more of us agreeing with 75% than 100%.
Oh, so okay. You were 75, you two were 75,
Yeah,
you two were 7, okay, my bad.
that's okay.
No, you're right. But I wanted to talk about compromise.
I like that.
Okay? So we do have disagreement on the board. As a whole. How about 2 years, 100%, 2 years, 80%, 2 years, 60%, 2 years, 40%, 2 years, 20%. Here's your 10 years.
I like it.
Reduces the number of years at 100%, but still gives you 100% for a couple of years. And it's still 10 years. Better than 485E or B, but not quite as extensive for a profit-making organization.
So,
Me.
Okay. All right, I will, have a proposed revision to the entire UTEP to review it at our next meeting.
try
Okay?
to recap that conversation.
Can I just say, that was a really good discussion.
That was a really good.
I'm glad we had that.
Dave just wants to adapt and reuse, not adapt.
Just a professional critique, that's all.
The only other thing I wanted to mention, I talked to a couple of you before the meeting started, but Times Union, there was an article in here last week. And they looked at US Postal Service data on change of address forms. And they were looking at where in the years 2020 and through 2021, where did people migrate from Albany County? Okay, they're just looking at migration patterns from Albany County. All right,
So meaning they left Albany County.
They left
Where
Albany
did they go?
and and during that time period, where did the most people who left Albany County, where did they go?
And this was the COVID year.
This is the COVID year. What area of the United States of America did the single most people go to?
Florida.
Tennessee.
Fulton County?
Fulton County. Believe it or not. There
They were-
were
I have to see that.
18 people
Left Albany County.
left Albany County and moved to Fulton County during that time period.
They all came up to the lakes.
109 went to Westchester, 104 to Charlotte, North Carolina, 85 to Tampa, Florida, Pinellas, Florida, Cape Coral, Florida, Orlando, Florida, but Fulton County had the most people come from Albany County, New York, believe it or not.
I kind of believe it. I mean, seeing the new requests for service during COVID. I mean, we had a ton of people coming out of the cities. So Albany or even downstate further towards New York City, coming up, making their camps up here more year round so that they could stay and not have to be in the cities.
And during that time period, 1,943 people moved out of Fulton County. There was still a large exodus of people moving out, but 2,033 moved into the county. So that time period, there was a net in-migration of about 100 people into Fulton County.
Really?
Which I just thought was pretty. So there's your tidbit for the day.
So they're not just leaving. We
Right.
didn't gain a lot, but we
Right.
gained a little.
I bet
Good.
that's fairly unusual for counties up here to even show any gain.
Correct.
Yeah,
So it's very good.
Outside of Sarasota.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to request a motion to go in executive as stated on page 8 of the agenda.
I'll make a motion.
Sue, is there a second?
Thank you, Ken.
Yes. Second.
Thank you, Ted. All in favor, say aye.
Hi.
All right.
I never oppose. Going into executive at 9:12 a.m. Motion to adjourn.
Motion to return.
All in favor, say aye.